Hello and welcome. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following.
An Ontario court justice declares a mistrial in the sexual assault trial of 5 former World Junior hockey players. Plus, with the federal election in just days, party leaders are in the final push of their campaigns. Poilievre in Saskatchewan and BC today, while Carney and Singh are both spending time in Ontario. And heads of state and royalty converge on Rome for Pope Francis's funeral Saturday.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Naveen Day, filling in for Jeanette Roche. A new sexual assault trial will be held in London, Ontario for 5 former members of Canada's World Junior hockey team. An Ontario Superior Court justice declared a mistrial today and informed jurors that they were being discharged. Michael McLeod, Carter Hart, Alex Fermenton, Dylan Dubé, and Cal Foote are charged in connection to an alleged incident that took place in a hotel room 7 years ago. All of them have pleaded not guilty to sexual assault. With Election Day coming up this Monday, party leaders are in the final push of their campaigns. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is campaigning in what polls suggest are conservative safe ridings on Friday as Election Day approaches. He began his day in Saskatoon and campaigned on his crime platform and drove home the fact that the country needs a change.
Change, change, change. Change so that you can afford food and housing. Change so you're safe on your streets. Change so that we reverse liberal economic weakness and bring home our jobs. Change is what we need now more than ever. After a lost liberal decade of rising costs and crime, we can't afford a 4th liberal term.
Poilievre also made a point of bringing up Liberal leader Mark Carney being caught in a lie about his March conversation with Donald Trump and how Carney finally admitted to reporters that Trump did in fact make comments about Canada being the 51st state. Back in March, he had denied it.
Yesterday, Mark Carney was caught lying. If he's lying about that, we can be sure he's lying about inflation, lying about liberal tax increases, lying about the liberal housing crisis. The reality is that we cannot trust Mark Carney.
After Saskatoon, Poilievre will travel to Nanos Bay, BC to hold an evening rally tonight. Meanwhile, Liberal leader Mark Carney and NDP leader Jagmeet Singh both have busy days in Ontario. Carney has focused on U.S. tariff threats and highlighted his party's promise to forge a procurement strategy that relies on homegrown materials as part of his pledge to build an all-in-Canada auto manufacturing network.
We have a choice. Do we want to build or cut? No. Build! Build! We got a very ambitious, very positive agenda to build Sault Ste. Marie, to build Ontario, to build Canada, to get rid of the Americans. Yeah! And move forward. That's a bit harsh. We don't want to get rid of them. Just don't want to rely on them.
That's right.
We can't rely on them. We've learned that lesson.
The Liberals are widely seen to be leading in the polls, with the Conservatives in second place and the Bloc Québécois, NDP, and Greens trailing behind. Canadians will choose their next government on Monday. Tens of thousands of mourners have waited hours in line to bid a final farewell to Pope Francis at the Vatican's St. Peter's Basilica. This happened right up until the Argentine Pope's coffin was sealed earlier today in preparation for his funeral tomorrow. Heads of state and royalty are already starting to converge on Rome. Governor General Mary Simon will lead a senior delegation to represent Canada at the funeral, and all 5 of Canada's cardinals are expected to attend. Prince William, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and U.S. President Donald Trump are also expected to be there. And while some 200,000 mourners are expected to gather in St. Peter's Square Saturday for Francis's funeral, Italy is deploying more than 2,500 police officers and 1,500 soldiers to provide security. Officials say the major security operation includes stationing an armed naval vessel off the coast and putting squads of fighter jets on standby. Francis died earlier this week at the age of 88 after suffering a stroke and heart failure. An Associated Press reporter who covered Pope Francis at the Vatican and traveled all around the world with him during his entire pontificate earned a unique nickname from him in 2018 during a particularly low point in his papacy when he was struggling with cases of priests who sexually abused children. Here is Nicole Winfield reflecting on her time with Pope Francis.
Francis, when he was elected, didn't really have a good sense, especially of the issue of clergy sexual abuse. And for American media in particular, that was a major issue. And so there were some challenging moments where I and other journalists really had to call him out on things that he had not understood or misunderstood or made some really bad mistakes.
Io non ho sentito alcuna vittima di Barros. Stava parlando, ma non sono, non sono venuti, non hanno dato le evidenze per il giudizio. È un po' sull'aria questo, è una cosa che non si può prendere. Lei con buona volontà mi dice ci sono delle vittime, ma io non le ho visto. Non si sono presentati.
He later told me in an interview that was the moment that the bomb exploded. And he said, you know, his head exploded because he realized that he had not understood the situation until then.
Back here in Alberta, members of the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees say soiled sheets and lost valuables are the new norm in Alberta hospitals, thanks to privatized laundry services, and they have the photos to prove it. AUPE members and other healthcare workers report that gowns, sheets, and rags are often soiled or filled with used needles after returning from K-Bro, the private company hired by the provincial government to provide laundry services for healthcare centres across the province. According to the union's vice president, Curtis Jackson, some staff have even reported finding dentures and used diapers in supposedly clean linens. He says some hospitals have even resorted to purchasing washers and dryers to rewash soiled linens.
We've discovered that the contract with K-Bro is now costing the province significantly more than in-house laundry services has. We know for a fact that it was not the current cabinet that made the decisions to award the contract to K-Bro Linen Services. What we have in front of us is an opportunity for Premier Smith to show that she actually respects jobs in this province and workers in this province, that she has an interest in fixing the wrongs and bringing linen services back into the public domain.
Former Premier Jason Kenney's government officially privatized all publicly operated hospital laundry services in late 2021 and into 2022. AUPE members are now worried Premier Danielle Smith's relationships with Trump officials and allies in the United States will inspire her to further Americanize Alberta's healthcare system. The provincial government and Alberta's trade unions are joining forces to develop a new apprenticeship program. $15 million from the latest provincial budget will be spent over the next 3 years, giving grants to unions so they can offer apprenticeship training in high-demand programs. Advanced Education Minister Rajan Sawhney explains the grant application process.
As a first step, Advanced Education will be issuing a call for proposals. Proposals will be assessed based on criteria such as proof of labour market demand, workforce development impact, pricing and value, and the strength of the individual proposal. To qualify, projects must be offered by a union training provider operating in Alberta that has been approved by Advanced Education to offer recognized apprenticeship training. All apprenticeship seats funded under the grant program must increase system capacity beyond the seats currently being offered by the provider. In other words, this funding will create more seats and train more apprentices than we're training today.
This announcement is not just about numbers and seats. It's about investing in the women and men who are building the future of Alberta. Skilled tradespeople are the backbone of our economy, And with this new funding, we can ensure that the next generation is fully equipped to step into these great careers with strong wages, pensions, and benefits. These are careers that people can build families around and retire with dignity.
This new grant program is the first partnership of its kind between Alberta's government and union partners. The program is expected to open 650 new apprenticeship seats per year. A new 10-bed involuntary treatment facility has opened in a British Columbia jail to treat those who are mentally ill, have brain injuries, and are addicted. Standing outside the Surrey Pretrial Centre, Premier David Eby says he understands why some groups might feel anxious about involuntary care in BC.
We have a really unfortunate history in the province of involuntarily detaining different groups, forced treatment, sterilization, residential schools, you name it. The legacy of institutional care in this province is not a positive one. So what this does is it creates the possibility for us to intervene in that cycle of community, criminal offense, jail. Community, criminal offense, jail, over and over again. This is the population that people are anxious about. It's people that are struggling in a way that also compromises not just their safety, but also the safety of the broader community as a whole.
Now here in Lethbridge, fire and emergency crews responded to a structure fire this morning at a house on 2nd Avenue A North. Crews say they got the call at around 8 a.m. where they found a backyard garage up in flames. Crews were able to quickly contain the fire within its vicinity, with fire damage spreading only to a power pole that resulted in a power outage and smoke damage to homes on either side. Crews were able to restore power to over 200 affected customers in the area. Neighbors of the property, however, told BCN that the backyard of the residence was filled with garbage and used for homeless encampments, with one neighbor saying he sent multiple disturbance complaints to authorities. No injuries have been reported, and damage is estimated at around $75,000. The City of Lethbridge is putting out the call to emerging and early career artists to participate in a unique public art mural mentorship opportunity. This paid mentorship will see a local artist get hands-on guidance and collaborative learning with professional muralist Jill Stanton of Edmonton. The local artists will create an indoor mural which will be displayed at the Lethbridge Regional Park and Ride Transit Terminal. Stanton says she's excited about this mentorship opportunity.
I suppose I do a lot of unofficial mentorships very often. So I do have like quite a bit of information to share, and I'm always happy and excited to do it. So I'm pretty pumped about working with somebody more kind of like one-on-one and really kind of like guiding them through what they want to learn in context of mural painting. Yeah, so I guess rarely do I do a specific mentorship, but I think this will be fun.
The program includes 20 hours of mentorship, a $500 design fee, and a $3,500 mural budget. Artists must be based in the Lethbridge area and be available from June 2025 to January 2026. You have until Sunday, May 18th to submit your expressions of interest. You can do that online at publicart@artslethbridge.org. Sounds like a great opportunity. Street sweeping will get underway next week in the county of Lethbridge. Beginning next Wednesday, crews will be out sweeping up the leftover gravel and debris from the winter months. The first hamlets and neighborhoods to be swept will be Edgemore, Sunset Acres, Mountain Meadows, Riverbrink Estates, and Monarch. Residents are being reminded to remove all vehicles, equipment, and trailers from the streets on your scheduled day. Signs will be posted in each community prior to their scheduled dates. Crews will not return to areas once they have been swept. You can get the full sweeping schedule online at lethcounty.ca. Well, the city is all in a buzz after the Lethbridge Hurricanes clinched their spot in the WHL's Eastern Conference Finals on Wednesday night. They eliminated the Calgary Hitmen in 7 games and are in Medicine Hat tonight to begin the 3rd round series against the Tigers. On Thursday, fans got to send them off as they departed for the Hat in preparation for Game 1. BCN's Landon Hickok has more.
Hurricanes fans gathered outside the visitlethbridge.com arena on Thursday afternoon, cheering on as the team bus pulled away from the arena.
Go Canes, go! Go Canes, go!
Many fans say they are ecstatic to see their team back in a deep playoff run, as this marks the first time since 2018 that Lethbridge has made the third round of the Western Hockey League playoffs.
Oh man, it's been an amazing series so far. Yeah, the first and second round, watched them. We're just about every game, I guess. We're season ticket holders and follow them everywhere. Glad to see them go to the third round.
They've worked so hard this year, like just incredibly hard. So it's really good to see it pay off.
How excited are you for the Canes moving on to the third round?
Oh yeah. Say oh yeah.
Yeah, it's unreal to have the city's support here, and even our fans at the home games, and even last night in Game 7, the fans that traveled. It was remarkable. It was really cool to see. So I hope to see that continue in the third round here, and yeah, it gives us definitely a little extra motivation knowing our city has our backs.
The Canes and Medicine Hat Tigers have held a spirited rivalry throughout the season, meeting 8 times, with the Tigers winning 5 of these matchups, including the latest 4. The Canes say their defensive end, including their high-ranked penalty kill, is crucial in order to halt the Tigers' offensive threat, led by Gavin McKenna.
Well, I mean, they have some elite players. I think everybody knows that. I don't need to say their names. It's going to come down to if we can, shut down players like 72 and 7 and 21 and 24. Their power play's been clipping at an elite rate, and we've seen what those guys can do in our building and in theirs.
Obviously, they're a super skilled group, and I feel like Calgary was pretty similar in some ways. So just keeping that defensive mentality and kind of keeping our structure, that'll do for us.
Puck drop for games 1 and 2 is at 7 p.m. both tonight and Saturday before the series shifts back down Highway 3 to Lethbridge on Tuesday and Wednesday for games 3 and 4.
I think looking back into the final few games of the regular season, things got a little chippy, definitely physical. So it'll be pretty cool to see the rivalry in a playoff type atmosphere.
For Bridge City News, I'm Landon Hickok.
I'm really glad we were able to get comment from that dog. And speaking of hockey, in the Battle of Ontario, Toronto sits 1 game from the original 6 franchise's first playoff sweep since 2001. With Benoit as the OT hero, the Leafs downed the Senators to take a 3-0 stranglehold. Here is Joshua Clipperton with the Canadian Press.
Simon Benoit scored 79 seconds into overtime as the Toronto Maple Leafs defeated the Ottawa Senators 3-2 to take a 3-0 stranglehold in their first-round playoff series. The gritty defenseman fired a puck through traffic after Austin Matthews won an offensive zone face-off before getting mobbed by teammates on the ice here at Canadian Tire Centre. Matthews added a goal in regulation for Toronto. Matthew Nyes also scored for the Leafs. Goaltender Anthony Stolarz made 18 saves to win an 11th straight start for Toronto dating back to March 20th. Brady Tkachuk and Claude Giroux replied for Ottawa, which was playing its first home playoff game since 2017. The Senators were once again cleaned out in the faceoff dot after the Leafs won 63% of draws in Game 3. Ottawa will look to avoid the sweep in the Battle of Ontario in Game 4. The Leafs' last sweep came back in 2001 against the Senators.
When it comes to helping our own community, many positive and practical ideas emerge. Christine Knaus, author of the cookbook The Farmer's Table, is raising funds through the sale of her book to support the Bringing Hearts Home campaign. Knaus says the special fundraising campaign continues until the end of April. The book's author explains how this initiative began.
A couple years before 2020, I was having some random health type of issues, and they really couldn't, being young, they struggled to diagnose what was actually going on. It wasn't until I finally got in to see a cardiologist that they realized that I needed a pacemaker. And so then in 2020, right when COVID started and things got shut down, they put in my first pacemaker. There were some issues with it, so they had to go back in, do a revision on it. That was probably the most terrifying part when I realized that Lethbridge needed some more support for cardiac care. Hospital Foundation had their gala, and it was just super heartwarming to see the community come together and support something. And so then I kind of got a bug in my head about trying to help as well. And along with the Chinook Regional Hospital Foundation, we are using this month's proceeds from the cookbook to benefit the Bringing Hearts Home campaign.
The $30 million Bringing Hearts Home cardiac campaign will provide local access to cutting-edge cardiac care, including upgraded facilities at Chinook Regional Hospital and Medicine Hat Regional Hospital, and expanded critical care with more cardiac and ICU beds. More than $7.4 million is the one-time injection the government of Alberta has allocated to support the province's regional agricultural societies. Alberta has more agricultural societies than any other province, with 292 organizations. R.J. Sigurdsson, Minister of Agriculture and Irrigation, said, quote, "This funding will ensure our regional agricultural societies are able to keep up their good work and continue to be pillars of their communities." For his part, Kim Galucci, the acting CEO with Lethbridge and District Exhibition, explains what it represents for the city.
To help us develop sustainability programs and further develop the regional ag society as a whole, to go towards governance, to go towards asset management planning, and then some literally to top up with some of the challenges we're facing, which is higher utilities, inflation costs. The community will really benefit in the sense that we won't require as many dollars this year, but more so in the future. The more revenue we can develop and the more opportunity that we can invest in certain programming equipment or programming capital that will let us move into new areas, then that will develop even more new revenues, draw more people to Lethbridge, which then will help the greater community through tourism, through sport tourism, through just our overall programming that brings people in.
The Alberta government said this is on top of the continued annual total funding of $2.8 million for regional agricultural societies through the Agricultural Societies Grant Program. Now turning our attention overseas, long lines of cars were seen congesting the Indian-Pakistani borders after an attack in Kashmir caused tensions to soar. Indian and Pakistani nationals attempted to head back to their home countries Friday as both sides revoked all visas issued to each other's nationals, with hostilities intensifying following a massacre of 26 people, mostly Indian tourists, in the hotly contested Kashmir region, which New Delhi linked to Pakistan. One woman says she had a visa for 45 days, but now must leave India in a week. A man being interviewed said at least 5,000 people are stuck on the Pakistan side, and they're hearing the border is going to close. He's left wondering, if this happens, where are people going to go when their families and businesses are on the other side? We need to take a short break, but we'll be right back with the full weather forecast. And the weather's looking mighty nice. Nothing but double-digit temperatures in store for us. Stay tuned for the details.
Our 7-day forecast has our weekend looking nice and sunny, with today having a high of 19, tomorrow having a high of 21, and Sunday having a high of 19. Monday and Tuesday will both have highs of 16 with partly cloudy skies. Wednesday will have a high of 18 with partly cloudy skies, and Thursday will have a high of 26 with sunny skies. Today's almanac has us with an average high of 15 degrees for this time of year, alongside an average low of 1. The record high on this day was set back in 1910 with 31, and the record low was set back in 1909 with minus 12. The sun rose at 6:20 a.m. today and will set at 8:40 p.m. Our national forecast has Victoria and Vancouver with a 17 and 15 respectively, and both Edmonton and Calgary share sunny skies with highs of 21. The rest of the prairies are nice and sunny as well, with Saskatoon having a high of 21, Regina a high of 18, and Winnipeg a high of 19. Central Canada is going to get some showers, with Toronto getting a high of 12 with chance of showers, Ottawa having a high of 13, and Montreal a high of 15. The East Coast will also have chances of showers, with Fredericton having a high of 11, Halifax a 13, Charlottetown an 8, and to finish off the national forecast, St. John's will have a high of 5, with those chances of showers.
While there's still a few days left to make a bid to save the business, the 355-year-old Hudson's Bay Company has decided to preemptively liquidate the last 6 locations. This is the latest development in the fall of Canada's oldest company, which filed for creditor protection last month. Here is Tara Deschamps, who reports from HBC's flagship location in Toronto.
It's a big day for that location and 5 others because they are beginning their liquidation sales. Essentially, earlier this week, the company admitted that there was a low probability of them finding a buyer to keep those last 6 stores alive. As some people remember, 90 have already begun their liquidation ahead of today. So for these 6, they were joining the rest of the pack. The store was quite busy. There were people jogging through. They were looking for items like the company's famed stripes that seemed to be like the hot thing that everyone wanted. By the time I made it past that area, there were only a few blankets left. There were some mugs, but some of those like high profile items had really been taken. You could tell that the area had been picked over quite a bit. For me, the area that stood out was really the jewelry. That was teeming with people. They were sort of like fighting for the attention of the people behind the desk to retrieve items that were in the glass cases. I saw people who were walking out with, 6 or 7 different items. Some of the shoppers I talked to said these were birthday gifts for years to come or anniversary gifts for years to come. And because they were marked down at 70%, they couldn't imagine where else they would find a discount that heavy.
I have many fond memories of the Bay downtown Winnipeg, dining at the Paddle Wheel restaurant on the top floor and going for malts in the basement. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 17 points of the day to finish at 24,710. The Dow was up 20 points to 40,113. The S&P 500 was up 40 to 55.25, and the Nasdaq was up 216 points to finish at 17,382. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 23 cents to 63.02 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 3 cents to 2.96 US. Gold was down just over 30 cents to $3,318.27 US an ounce. And silver was down 5 cents to 33.06 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.90 per bushel. Barley is at $6.90. Canola is at $15.73. And corn is at $8.20 per bushel. Live cattle were up 75 cents to $214.25. Feeder cattle May contract was up $1.45 to $290.53. Also May contract, lean hogs were up 85 cents to $92.80. The Canadian dollar was unchanged at 72 cents US. Recapping one of our top stories, tens of thousands of mourners have waited hours in line to bid a final farewell to Pope Francis at the Vatican's St. Peter's Basilica. This happened right up until the Argentine Pope's coffin was sealed earlier today in preparation for his funeral tomorrow. Heads of state and royalty are already starting to converge on Rome. Governor General Mary Simon will lead a senior delegation to represent Canada at the funeral, and all 5 of Canada's cardinals are expected to attend. Prince William, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and U.S. President Donald Trump are also expected to be there. During elections, political parties and news organizations love to conduct and talk about polls. But do most Canadians understand what these snapshots of opinion mean, and can the numbers be trusted? Reg Manzer is one of the hosts of the Elevate podcast. He gives BCN's Jeanette Roche a breakdown of how polling is done and what the numbers actually mean. That interview is coming up next. And when you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. You can also visit our website or YouTube channel anytime to check out more of our stories and interviews.
During elections, political parties and news organizations love to conduct and talk about polls. But do most Canadians understand what these snapshots of opinion even mean, and can the numbers be trusted? Reg Manzer is one of the hosts of the Elevate podcast, and on a recent episode, he did a breakdown of how polling is done and what the numbers actually mean. We welcome him to our program today. Hello, Reg. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm doing great.
It's
Happy
wonderful.
to be here.
Oh, thank you for joining us. Okay, so Reg, you are a researcher, and you love what most people hate, which is numbers, including myself. So let's cut to the chase here. Can polls be biased?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, when you look at data in any kind of format, you can definitely make it say whatever you want it to say, but ideally, polls would follow the standards that are set out by the national research councils to try and keep the information as accurate as possible.
Okay, and I understand that, I mean, bias can happen with numbers. You think of numbers as being a true thing, like math doesn't lie, but this is a different kind of numbering system, right?
Yeah. Well, it's hard because what you're doing is you're taking qualitative things, so feelings, ideas, intentions, and you're kind of turning them into numbers. So when that happens, that conversion, that's where the bias kind of creeps in. So the way you ask a question, who you're asking the question of, where, like how many people you're asking that question to, those can all kind of influence those numbers that are kind of seen as that source of truth. So there's a few ways you can kind of slip things in and maybe alter things, or honestly, in just by accident, make the wrong assumption.
And then there can also be like a margin of error, I would imagine, too, or in how something's worded could alter the effect, I would imagine.
Yeah, so that's more response bias. And I don't know if you saw, but David Coletto, he's the head for Abacus Data. He actually kind of talked about that on a recent interview. He said, you know, maybe we've had some response bias, which is, you know, are we asking the right questions? Are we leading people to the answers that we think we're going to get? So that's kind of a way you can do that. With margin of error is a little bit different. So in kind of, you know, academic research, they use margin of error because you can ask a group of people. So if I walked up to you on the street and I said, hey, how do you feel about politics in Canada? Are you going to vote Liberal? Are you going to vote Conservative? There's a randomness to it because you're just picking people out of the crowd. With these polls, they put a margin of error on that, but it doesn't really mean a whole lot because they're really pulling from their group of candidates that they can ask. So people will sign up for online surveys, or they'll sign up to be called. So there's not really a really good margin of error. You're only seeing margin of error come into play when people are just cold calling numbers, but that doesn't happen as often as people think.
What about sample size? Because sometimes you'll see, based on a poll of 1,500 people, 1,500 people isn't a lot of people to come up with an average for most Canadians say, based on 1,000 people.
Yeah, so sample size is another interesting one because, as you know, as you get more people, you reduce the likelihood that you've said something incorrect. So the larger the number, the better. That's where you kind of see a difference between some of the polls. I know Ecos is kind of bad for it, where they will put out a poll that's based off of like 900 responses. You'll see something that's a little more stronger, like an Abacus Data, that will put out something on 1,800 responses. But even those samples, basically what they're doing is they're not going to be perfectly representative of the folks in the country, but they try to do their best to make the sample match the country. So they'll do that by selecting candidates that they know are the right age, the right gender, in the right location of the country, but they still can't get it quite perfect, so they do what's called weighting. And so they'll actually make an answer worth more or less depending on how much they need to fill up that category. So let's say we didn't get a lot of responses from Alberta, but Atlantic Canada was overwhelming in the responses, and we didn't hear a lot of responses from young men in Alberta. So what they'll do is they'll say, okay, we had 20 people that fit the description of a young Albertan man who've responded, and we need 40 to make it representative of the country using Statistics Canada data. So they'll actually make every response that's out of that 20 worth double. And they'll say, oh, well, we had 80 and we only needed 40 from Atlantic Canada. So they'll make every response worth half. So what that does is they're doing their best to try and make that representative of the country, But if you asked 20 people in Alberta and they all said, oh, we're all voting Liberal, which, historically is not the way Alberta goes, you've just doubled the impact of that one response. So it's not a perfect system. And I think that was kind of one of the things that brought attention to the video that you referenced earlier, was just we were looking at the fact that Alberta, Quebec, and BC were just significantly under-sampled when we looked at the data. So all of their responses that they did get were worth way more. So if they only asked a few people and those few people just happened to be voting Liberal, then it would completely skew the data that way.
Okay, so that's weighting, right? And that's
Yes.
the WEIGHT, not WAIT. Just so that we're clear on that. Okay. How are most of the polls done today? Is it by phone? Is it online or robocall?
So it's a combination of both. You don't really see so many human-to-human interactions anymore. That's just the nature of the way things have gone with technology. It's mostly online surveying and that robocalling that you're hearing. I believe that's called I'm going to pull up my IVR. I was like, it's not IVF.
IVR.
IVR, interactive voice response. So that's where you get those, if you would like to vote Liberal, press 1. If you would like to vote Conservative, press 2. And it's just completely recorded, and they're using a touch-tone telephone. It's almost the same as what you do with like an online survey, but just through your phone instead.
Oh, that's so interesting. Is it as simple as the larger the sample size, the more accurate the poll? It sounds like completely opposite in some ways.
So it's kind of a little bit of both, right? So you want a large sample size so that you can kind of weed out anomalies, where, like I said before, if you asked 20 people and they just all happen to be Conservative voters, or they all happen to be Liberal voters, then having a larger sample size reduces that potential for bias. But ideally what you do is you're trying to really sample based off of the Statistics Canada distribution for the population. So trying to get that right distribution for the provinces, trying to get the right number of folks for the age groups. In the most recent polling done by Abacus, actually, they did a really good job to try and match that. So their weighting and their sample sizes were larger, and then their weighting was actually a little bit better because they didn't have to change that amount as much, because they actually got a closer number that's representative of what the country actually looks like. Ecos, I feel bad I'm crapping on them a little bit, but they didn't do a very good job of that. They still are showing that they're overrepresenting like the 65 plus crowd and just not getting anybody in that younger generation. So that's why you kind of see the difference in the voter intentions to come out in between those two polls, where you'll see Abacus data say that their voter intention is a lot narrower between the two parties, and then when you look at Ecos, it's like way different.
You talked about weighted, or weight, WEIGHT. What's the difference between unweighted and weighted responses?
So your unweighted responses, that's just that's what you started in with, it's what everybody said. And so that is where you're not accounting for the fact that you need to make some or less worth more depending on part of the country you ask. So if you went with an unweighted sample, you asked only Albertans, and then you said, this is representative of the country, you'd say, oh my gosh, it's 100% likelihood of Conservatives winning. So you have to do the weighted, because that's what makes it actually generalizable to the rest of the country.
Okay. How is it that one poll can have the Liberals ahead and another poll show the Conservatives and the Liberals in a dead heat?
Well, it again comes down to sampling, and it's also just who you're asking, right? So if you're asking a group of people out of one part of the country, and you weight them differently, and it's the questions you're asking too. I know that I think it was Angus Reid that kind of came under fire recently because of their polling questions. They basically said, is Polyev closer to Hitler or Stalin? And you're like, what? How is that actually something you can ask? And so obviously I'm paraphrasing a bit, but it was to that extreme level where you ask a question that is so leading that you're going to get an answer that you want to get. And what happens is that when you have some of the folks who represent those polls going on to social media sites and saying, you know, one particular leader is not going to get in over my dead body kind of situation, then you have to wonder like how much personal bias has been injected into some of these polls. And that's what makes watching the CBC poll tracker really, really challenging, is because what they've kind of done is they said, you know, we realize that sample size is an issue, so we're just going to take all of the data from all of the polls and cram it into our master poll.
Okay.
But, you know, much like food, if you add too much salt in the recipe, all you're going to taste is salt. So when you look at these data, even if you have one bad poll, it's going to throw off the entire thing. So that's why it's really challenging to look at these polls and take them as truth. You really just have to, you know, go by the day of election and look at that. These are kind of just they're a temperature check for parts of the country, and they're a temperature check that is either great or terrible depending on what kind of thermometer you're using and who's using it.
Yeah.
But that's kind of really what you have to take with these polls.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. How accurate or trustworthy is something like the CBC poll tracker? And of course, they track all those polls, including every publicly available poll, like the ones that are completely biased and out of whack. So the results, it sounds like the results can be skewed in those cases.
Oh yeah, definitely. And one of the things too is that people just need to realize that sometimes there's not a lot of psychological safety to ask or to answer the questions. So sometimes folks will give the answer that they think that the researcher or the pollster is looking for, just to kind of be like, leave me alone, here's your answer that you're looking for. And so it was funny, there was a poll actually done in the States when they had the most recent election there, where they asked folks, who do you think your neighbor is going to vote for? And that actually produced a more accurate representation of what people ended up doing on election day. So I think that if polls were a little bit better, they might,
right?
they might ask that, and they might say, who do you think your neighbor is going to vote for? And that might give a better representation. So again, it's the questions you ask.
Right. Okay, so it's neat that you bring up the United States, because regarding the U.S. election recently, so a lot of Canadians obviously watched that, and a lot of pollsters got it wrong, saying that Kamala Harris was in the lead and in a position to win. So how did they get it so wrong?
Well, I think that the United States and Canada were a little bit different here. I think that there was a lot of overestimation on Kamala, and I think that there was a lot of hype around her potential election, and which didn't come to pass, obviously. But yeah, I think when you kind of compare what they did and to our polls, I think that we're in a different game. I don't think that we're going to see the same kind of overwhelming takeover like we saw in the States, just because the candidates are different, the platforms are different, and frankly, Canadians are different. So I would be, this one's going to be a tough one to call personally, and I know that we get that question a lot on the podcast too. Who do you think we should see in that seat?
Right.
And who do you think is actually going to win that seat? And it's a really tough one to call, honestly.
Yeah. So quickly here, when you look at the crowds at certain political events, like the Polyev event, for example, in Edmonton, some of those have, drawn huge crowds. So have our eyes been lying to us compared to what the polls say?
I really don't think that our eyes are lying to us. I think there's a lot more support out there than people imagine. I know that just in my circles, when you say that you're a conservative voter, people kind of, get all up in arms. And then you see these, I'll call them quiet conservatives that come and say, oh, I'm voting conservatives as well. I'm glad you said something. So again, I think it's, I don't think your eyes are lying, but also it's going to be hard because there's such large urban centers where the rallies are not taking place. That are not typically conservative voting. So big centers like Montreal and Toronto and even Halifax. Like we had a rally, I think it was last year here, which filled the room and had spilled out into the hallways. But This time around, there was no rally planned for Halifax, and instead the rally is going to be in Trenton, which is about 2 hours away from Halifax on your way to Cape Breton. So, and I do understand why they're doing that. They're trying to, get to the everyday person and really connect with that everyday person. But yeah, it's hard to say because those larger urban centers hold so many votes and hold so many seats. So it will be interesting to see that divide between the everyday person, the country person versus the large urbanite. So we'll see.
For sure. Well, Reg, we appreciate you joining us today, and thank you so much for educating us all about polling numbers. Very interesting indeed.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Reg Manzer is one of the hosts of the Elevate podcast. Well, the battle for Canada continues with election 2025, and the future direction of our country is on the line. So joining me in studio to chat about our federal election is Tanner Naday. He is an economic analyst from Lloydminster. He's a political commentator and public speaker. Tanner, welcome. Great to have you as our first studio guest since COVID.
My pleasure. Thank you for having
the
me.
inaugural one here. So great to have you with us today. Now, Tanner, the main focus so far in this campaign seems to be the tariff war and who can best stand up to Trump. So is this a long-term thing that we need to be worried about, or is it perhaps being used as a fear tactic to gain political advantage? What do you think?
That's a good question. Well, as far as I'm concerned, I think the main thing that Canadians ought to be concerned about is the Canadian federal government using the tariff war or the tariffs to justify all of these policies which I think are damaging for Canada. So my concern is the Canadian government using the American government to justify these policies which make no economic sense whatsoever. So I have no doubt, and we all know that the government right now is using the tariffs to justify very radical moves, or will indeed do so in the future if they're allowed to engage in that sort of action. So that's my ultimate concern.
Yeah, so you're against reciprocal tariffs?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
That doesn't help Canada. It harms Canada, and we're very foolish to try and engage in a trade war with America. That isn't something that we ought to do. No, instead, I think we ought to the best of our abilities, open up trade in the markets and demonstrate how free trade is beneficial to both countries and enables the flourishing of both countries to increase, not decrease, rather than what we are trying to engage with the American administration right now.
Yeah, your opinion's not much different than a lot of the people that we've been interviewing.
Yeah,
for
sure.
Now, Tanner, the polls continue to show a Liberal Party lead, but the Conservatives are narrowing that gap. So how much weight should we be putting in the polls?
Well, that's a good question too. To be entirely honest, I put all the weight on Jesus Christ. I don't put much weight into polls precisely because it's man's wisdom. I don't think it's Christ's wisdom. And so it might be that right now it says that Carney is winning or is going to win the election and Poilievre is going to lose, but I'm confident that the Lord will have his way. And maybe that does mean that Carney wins, perhaps. Maybe Poilievre wins. I don't know. What I do know is that, Almighty is sovereign and his will be carried out. So how much weight to put into polls? I would say not as much weight as I put into Jesus Christ.
Okay, yeah, and polls can be so deceiving
They can.
too. Maybe they're basing it on 1,500 people.
Of course. Oh, of course. It's
Right.
so difficult to do statistics. Absolutely.
Yeah. So certainly affordability, another major issue in this election, along with the housing market. And then it looks like both Carney and Poilievre are promising these GST cuts on new homes, but I'm guessing it'll take more than that to fix things.
Yeah.
So as an economic analyst, what do you think needs to be done to make housing more affordable?
Oh, you're absolutely right. Far more needs to be done than just cutting GST. We've had these low interest rates in Canada for how many years? They were artificially low, right? They were set to be so very low, as to then entice individuals who otherwise wouldn't be able to purchase a home to purchase a home. To be entirely honest, they didn't have the capital that was required to do so, but they were told by these low interest rates to buy right now. Now is the time to buy. It's cheap. And then when the lockdowns came and people were, working from home, that demand only increased. More and more people wanted a nice home to live because that's where they were working. And so with that increase, that spike in demand brought on by low interest rates and the lockdowns, you saw this massive jump in prices. Because of course, every builder knew there was money to be made right now. And along with this massive immigration that the country has, people need places to live. Lots of people need places to live. The demand continued to rise, and with that, an increase in the price of homes. So what do you do to stop the problem? Well, first, I'm convinced you have to cut immigration. I think it has to be zero, to be entirely honest, because you have to slow the demand, right? The first thing you do when the bathtub is overflowing is turn off the tap, right? You don't wait to do that, you do that first. And then you have to allow interest rates to move as they want to move. It's wrong to artificially restrict them so that they're so very low, giving these buyers a false impression of what the market is actually like. So there are multiple steps that need to be taken simply to introduce common sense into the interest rate markets and just the market in general, again, to try and stop the housing crisis.
Yeah, it's crazy. Now, here's an interesting one here. So, Tanner, one of the strange things about this election is to see that seniors who typically lean towards the Conservatives are supporting the Liberals these days. Well, the young people have now switched to leaning Conservative. What do you think is the driver behind that?
Well, I think with regards to the seniors, I think many seniors are concerned about change. They've lived as they've lived for many, many years. And what Mr. Poilievre is proposing and Mr. Bernier and so on too are the change is radically different compared to what the Liberals have introduced and implemented in Canada over the last 10 years. And so I think there is a real fear among seniors that if there's this massive change, this large shift, that their way of life will be disrupted seriously. But on the flip side, the younger generation, we can't afford homes. We can't afford to work only one job. We can't afford to have children and so on. And we're realizing that the economic situation is so much worse than what has been told to us by so many individuals. And so you can only deny reality for so long. It's no wonder young individuals want to change. This way of life that they've been promised is not coming to pass. And so they want to try and make something different to increase their chances of having this life which we desire.
Yeah, well, it sounds like the economy needs a major boost, doesn't it? And the Canadian public is now asking for coast-to-coast pipelines to be built. And it looks like Mark Carney has noticed this and is now promising to speed up major natural resource project approvals. But earlier in the campaign, he went on record stating that he will not repeal Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines bill, as it's known, right? So what do you make of this, Tanner?
Oh, that no pipelines will be built under Mr. Carney. Bill C-69 is so damaging for the energy markets. It allows so much regulatory uncertainty into the markets that investors who want to build big energy projects in Canada really have no desire to do so, because there's no guarantee that after they've built their project, the federal government won't shut down that project. And therefore, that investor might lose billions and billions of dollars. And so you have all of this holdup right now in Canada's economic markets. And unless you repeal bills like C-69 and C-48, that holdup won't go away. It won't be reduced. And so I think Mr. Carney's talk is just that. It's all talk.
Interesting. Okay, so Tanner, there's a lot of chatter in Western Canada with regard to the possibility of Alberta and perhaps even Saskatchewan separating, especially if Carney wins. So what are you hearing? Is this just talk or is it serious?
No, I'm hearing the same. There is a lot of talk about this, about the movement for independence and separation. I think it is serious. I think Albertans and the West at large, for that matter, is tired of the way that they've been treated over the last not just 1 or 2 or 5 years, but decades on decades on decades. And we're realizing that we've realized that what Ottawa is trying to pursue right now will completely transform our way of life into something that we do not want it to be. So yes, that momentum for independence right now is roaring. And I think should Mr. Carney be elected on the 28th, it's only going to explode.
Wow, interesting to see what will happen there. So Pierre Poilievre continues to make tough on crime an election issue. And he's made some announcements. So he's promising this 3 strikes and you're out legislation, which would see criminals found guilty of 3 serious offenses facing a minimum prison term of 10 years. And they could be designated as dangerous criminals, or dangerous offenders rather. So some are arguing this is much too harsh. So what do you think about
They're wrong. It's not much too harsh. I think we live in a country right now that has been far too soft on crime for a very long time. Sometimes it seems like the only way to avoid jail in this country is to actually commit a crime. So I'm very much in favor of strengthening our justice system compared to what it is right now.
What kind of character traits should Canadian voters be looking for in a prime minister?
Well, right now I'm looking for a prime minister who's righteous. I want a man who will follow the law and do what is right according to the scripture. That's what I want first and foremost. And I want a man or a woman who has an air of statesmanship and doesn't engage in this new progressive Marxist nonsense, and instead wants to see the Canadian flourish and see the Canadian family flourish. That's what I'm looking for in a Prime Minister, and in the government at large, for that matter.
You've mentioned faith being very important.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's what you're looking for in a
Yeah.
leader as well. So what would you then say to Christians watching who may be hesitant to get involved in the election?
You must be involved. You know, there's an old quote that says, you know, you might not want to be involved in politics, but politics will be involved in you. We have the great privilege of being able to be involved in our government and in our political process that so many people around the world do not have. And I think it a shame and a disgrace to not be involved in that process, considering the privilege has been given to us. And if we are not active in the political process, then I think we deserve everything which is coming to us. If we have an opportunity to ensure that we can maintain or increase our rights and freedoms, then we have an obligation to do so.
Okay. So, Tanner, what's your prediction as to the outcome of this election then? Who will win and by what margin?
That's a very good question. Like Chesterton, you know, I prefer to prophesy after the event already occurs. So I might say my prediction is, well, as I said at the start, the Lord will have his way. You know, I really don't know how the election's going to turn out, but I'm confident that the Lord will have what he desires in this election. We're right now living in this stunning age, you know, that is unprecedented in Canadian history, with the rise in independence, or at least the momentum for independence, with the younger generation transforming the political arena, or at least trying to, and becoming more and more involved. And I'm very encouraged to see all that's happening in the country. I'm very encouraged to see just how many people are starting to realize and have realized that perhaps Canada's government isn't all that they say they've cracked up to be. You know, so much of what's been told to us is coming out to be deception, and we're looking at how we can be involved to make our lives better, and how we can champion the family and champion that structure which has been neglected for so many years. So I'm very encouraged. I'm very excited about the future, and I have full confidence that yes, if we work as hard as we can, and if we do what's been commanded to us, then the outcome will be very positive for us as a people.
It's really different times right now, and this feels like such a different election. Do you think that the outcome will be higher in terms of voter turnout?
Oh, yes, I would imagine so. I would think so, especially with how Mr. Poilievre has galvanized so many Conservatives to his rallies. I think the Liberal side and the NDP side and so on of the political aisle recognize that and see that, and I think it will galvanize them too to head to the polls and vote for Mr. Carney or whoever they choose. So yes, I would expect a high voter turnout. If it wasn't high, that would surprise me.
Yeah, and you mentioned Poilievre there, and it's interesting to see that rally that he had in Edmonton the other day, the number of people that came out when Edmonton, I know provincially Edmonton's a very NDP town, right?
Yes.
So did that surprise you to see that number of Conservatives, I guess?
Well, yeah, I don't know that it would surprise me. I mean, it was an incredible number, no doubt. But you know, Alberta's going to vote. I mean, you never want to predict the future that you don't know. But of course, we expect Alberta to vote Conservative. So to see that number of individuals coming to Mr. Poilievre's rally in Alberta, in Nisku and Nisku Leduc area, I think again just shows how people are looking for a change, and they want to support someone who they believe will help rescue them from this last decade of Liberal rule.
Thanks so much for being with us today, Tanner.
My pleasure.
Really appreciated having you in as our first in-studio
Yes.
guest since COVID.
How exciting. Thank you for having me.
Times are changing. Tanner Naday is an economic analyst and political commentator and public speaker. We were so blessed to have him today. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thank you so much.